Ever feel like the universe is playing hide and seek with us? Like it's got all these secrets, but it's not quite ready to spill the tea.
Ah, hiding those fundamental laws of physics, eh? Bit like trying to find a needle in a haystack sometimes.
Exactly. And today, we're diving headfirst into one of those mysteries, the Higgs boson.
The Higgs, huh? Yeah, that little thing that's responsible for why stuff actually has mass.
It's a big deal in the world of physics. And for this deep dive, we're cracking open a pretty hefty tome, the Handbook of LHC Higgs cross-sections.
Now, that's a mouthful. And trust me, it's not light reading. Hundreds of physicists contributed to this thing.
Seriously, a global effort, which
Yeah.
makes sense given we're talking about, well, the universe and all.
Absolutely. And speaking of brilliant minds, we'll be focusing on work by some big names in the field, like M. Beckingham, A. Nikitenko, the BBHBH production gurus.
Oh, and let's not forget S. Dawson and C. Engler tackling the mysteries of Higgs pair production, or HH complex stuff.
Mind-bendingly complex. But that's the fun part, isn't it?
Well, I have to admit, when I first opened this handbook, it was a bit like, whoa, where do I even start? Equations galore, talk of cross-sections, but not the kind you see on a map.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure. But that's why we're here to break it down, make it digestible.
Exactly, and maybe blow our minds a little along the way. So, to set the stage, we're focusing on how the Higgs boson is actually produced in particle accelerators, like the Large Hadron Collider.
Ah, yes, the LHC. Smashing protons together at nearly the speed of light. That's where the magic happens.
It's like a subatomic demolition derby. But out of that chaos, we get a glimpse into the building blocks of the universe.
And the most common way we see the Higgs pop up, through a process called gluon fusion.
Gluon fusion. Okay, now we're talking particle physics jargon. What's a gluon, anyway?
Imagine it like this. You've got these tiny particles, quarks, that make up protons and neutrons.
Right, got it.
Gluons are like the glue that holds those quarks together. And during gluon fusion, two of these gluons, they collide.
And boom, a Higgs boson appears.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, but you've got the general idea.
Yeah, I figured there had to be a bit more to it. But just to add another layer of intrigue, gluon fusion isn't the only way to produce the Higgs boson.
Oh, the universe loves to keep us on our toes. There's vector boson fusion, too. Think of it like a high-energy game of billiards with particles instead of balls.
And then there's associated production, like the Higgs has a little buddy system going on. But here's the kicker, even with gluon fusion being the most common way to produce a Higgs.
There are still a lot of unknowns, a lot of head-scratching moments. And that, my friend, is where things get really interesting.
Because it highlights how much we still don't know.
Exactly. The universe is full of surprises, and we're just starting to scratch the surface.
So we left off talking about uncertainties in the world of particle physics. Sounds almost poetic, doesn't it? Uncertainties in the universe.
It's more common than you might think. It's like we can map out the cosmos, but those tiny particles, they're still keeping some secrets.
And one of the big mysteries is figuring out how often these elusive particles actually pop up in our experiments. And that's where cross-sections come in, right?
Bingo. You see, it's all about probability. Imagine you're trying to hit a target. The bigger the target, the easier it is to hit, yeah.
Makes sense. So a larger cross-section means there's a higher chance of those gluons colliding and boom, a Higgs boson is born.
You've got it. But here's the thing. Even with a giant target, you're not always going to hit the bullseye.
There's always a chance of missing, right?
Exactly. And in particle physics, those misses, those uncertainties, they come from a variety of sources. Think of it like trying to predict exactly where a leaf will land when it falls from a tree.
Okay, so we've got wind, maybe a gust here and there, changing its direction.
Exactly. Air resistance, too.
Yeah.
And maybe a bird swoops by and gives it an extra little push. We call these theoretical uncertainties. And one of the big ones is accounting for higher order corrections.
Higher order corrections sounds complicated.
It's all about those tiny, almost insignificant factors that can still influence the outcome, like the rotation of the leaf, the humidity in the air, things we might not even think about at first.
It's like those domino effects, where one tiny nudge at the beginning can make a huge difference in the end.
Now you're getting it. But here's another layer of complexity for you. Sometimes it's not just about the external factors. Sometimes the uncertainty lies within the ingredients themselves.
You mean the gluons, those fundamental particles we were talking about?
The very same. We describe their behavior with something called Parton Distribution Functions, or PDFs for short. And guess what?
Don't tell me those PDFs have uncertainties too.
You're catching on. It's like trying to bake a cake, but you're not entirely sure how much flour you're starting with. Could be a teaspoon extra, could be a bit less. Changes the whole game, right?
Baking with a dash of uncertainty. So how do physicists even begin to make sense of all this?
That's the beauty of science. We're constantly refining our understanding, tweaking our models, and, well, admitting when we don't have all the answers. For example, older cross-section calculations, they use something called pole mass. But newer research leans towards MS mass, subtle difference, but it actually leads to about a 2% increase in the predicted cross-section.
2% seems tiny.
In the grand scheme of things, maybe. But in the world of particle physics, where precision is everything, that 2% is huge. It's like realizing you've been slightly off on your measurements this whole time, and suddenly everything clicks into place.
So it's all about getting those measurements as accurate as possible, which must be tricky when you're dealing with particles that are, well, invisible to the naked eye.
That's putting it mildly. And remember those proton collisions at the LHC we were talking about? They're not exactly neat and tidy affairs. It's more like a chaotic explosion of particles.
Talk about a mess. How do they even begin to find what they're looking for in all that chaos?
That, my friend, is where things get really ingenious. They use a technique called jet veto efficiency to help isolate the Higgs signal. Think of it like this.
Okay, so we've got these proton collisions. They're creating a mess of particles. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, right?
It's definitely a challenge. And that's where this jet veto efficiency comes in. It's all about finding clever ways to sift through the noise and isolate the signal we're looking for.
So it's like having a filter that helps us zero in on the Higgs boson.
Exactly. You see, those proton collisions, they don't just produce Higgs bosons. They produce a whole shower of other particles. And those particles, they tend to clump together in these things we call jets.
Jets, like airplanes?
Not quite. Think of them as like sprays of particles, all moving in roughly the same direction. They're kind of like the debris field after a firework explodes.
Okay, so lots of little pieces flying off in every direction, and we need to figure out which of those pieces came from the Higgs boson.
Exactly. And that's where jet veto efficiency comes in. By studying the patterns of these jets, their energy, their direction, we can actually identify and exclude events where certain patterns appear, patterns that are more likely associated with background noise, with other particles.
So it's like we're ruling out the stuff we don't want so we can focus on what we do want.
You got it.
Yeah?
It's a bit like trying to listen for a whisper in a crowded room. If you can somehow block out all the other conversations, that whisper becomes a lot clearer.
That makes sense. But even with those filters, those jet veto techniques, there's still margin of error, right? We talked about those uncertainties earlier.
Absolutely. Determining these jet veto efficiencies accurately, it's a huge challenge in itself. There are different approaches, different algorithms, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, you've got the JVE method, which stands for jet veto efficiency. Pretty straightforward, right? And then you've got the ST method, which involves some pretty complex calculations based on something called transverse momentum.
Okay, so even the process of filtering out the noise has its own set of complexities. It's like we're going deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole of particle physics, and with every step, it gets more mind-boggling.
That's what makes it so fascinating. Every answer leads to more questions, and every discovery opens up new avenues of exploration.
It's humbling in a way, isn't it, to realize just how much we don't know about the universe we live in, but also kind of exciting.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this isn't just about abstract concepts, about equations on a chalkboard. Understanding the Higgs boson, how it's produced, how it interacts with other particles, it has implications for our understanding of, well, everything. The nature of mass, the origin of the universe, the fundamental forces that govern reality itself. It's all connected.
So we've been on this incredible journey today, diving deep into the world of particle physics, exploring the mysteries of the Higgs boson, and grappling with the challenges of measuring the immeasurable.
And through it all, we've seen the incredible ingenuity, the collaboration, and, frankly, the sheer determination of physicists around the world who are working tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the universe.
It's a testament to the power of human curiosity, our drive to understand the world around us, even at its most fundamental level. And while there are still many unanswered questions, one thing's for sure: the journey of discovery is far from over.